Penguins suffered perhaps their most embarrassing loss yet this season, and Pat and I are going to discuss that plus a lot more on today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at SendHimForWet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So if you are watching on YouTube, you can see that Pat, he has no jersey behind him for the first time all season. He is absolutely fed up. And I think everyone that is listening to/watching this episode of the show, you probably feel the same way. You're fed up with this team right now. I think the entire fan base is probably fed up as a whole. And it got started pretty early in this game against Arizona. They gave up that goal a few minutes into the game. Of course, Jason Zucker scores against his former team. You have Marcus Pettersson out to lunch in front of his own net. Yet again, just a miserable road trip for one of the three best defensemen on this team. You have Jeff Carter just going for a skate there, looking like my grandma on skates, to be honest. I don't really know what he was doing, just gliding back there, not really caring that Jason Zucker was about to score. And also, that was a really nice play by Logan Cooley. And then the Penguins were able to tie it up a little later on. Great play by Lars Eller and P.O. Joseph, especially to get to the net. I thought it was actually Joseph's goal at first, but Eller was the one who scored, and that was one thing I was looking to see, was more depth scoring. But then a few minutes after that, Penguins give up another goal because for some reason they decided to send two players after Clayton Keller and leave Valimaki just wide open in the high slot. Boom, shot goes in 2-1. Sidney Crosby once again wills his team back to tie the game. And then, in typical Penguins fashion again in this game, they give up a goal just 2 minutes later, 3-2, and that would be the game-winning goal just because no one knew what they were doing in the defensive zone. And Tristan Jarry was also flopping around in his net. I feel like for the second time this season, I feel like I'm saying this, it looked like the team quit in the third period. It looked like they quit on their head coach. It appeared that they did this against the Lightning, then they bounced back a little later on. But this loss in general with the road trip and with where they are in the standings and in the season in general, it just looked like that they quit, and it looked like they had no answers for what was going on. This loss could have devastating effects for the rest of the season because Kyle Dubas may have now made up his mind for what he wants to do at the trade deadline. This was a completely unacceptable performance, an embarrassing performance. There's really no other way to put it, to be honest. So I'm going to hand this over to you. I know you're going to absolutely crush this team as I did, and probably a lot worse, to be honest.
I've been trying because away from the Penguins game last night was the first time in a year and a half I've played an actual organized ice hockey game. So I was on cloud 9 last night because I finally got to play hockey again, and it was awesome. And since I got home from that game and watching the Penguins game last night up until this morning when we're recording on Tuesday morning, I have been trying to think of a way to describe this loss, and I figured it out just before we hit record. This is the most gutless loss I have ever seen in the Sidney Crosby Penguins era. It was absolutely embarrassing. And it's not just because of the own goal. The own goal is whatever. We'll talk about that. We'll laugh about it. We'll make our memes. It was the fact that you go on a road trip and you play relatively well for 2 periods against an unmanned, injured Vegas team, and then you give up in the third period and lose and get no points out of it after having a 2-0 lead. And then you come out against the Arizona Coyotes, who are a young, hungry team looking to make their mark and getting better. We talked about them yesterday. They are a solid young team that has a very bright future. And then you go out as a veteran team full of guys who have won Stanley Cups, guys who have been down the long road, guys who have made their mark and are making a way into the Hockey Hall of Fame once they hang up the skates. and you get outskated, you get outworked, you get outclassed, you get out everything by the Arizona Coyotes. I don't disagree with you that Eller had an okay game and P.O. Joseph had an okay game, but anyone not named Sidney Crosby last night was damn near a no-show. Everybody, top to bottom, everybody.
You're right.
It was an embarrassing effort. And simply put, if I'm Kyle Dubas, I'm the winner from last night's game. Not the Coyotes, not the Penguins. If I'm Kyle Dubas, I'm the winner. Because I go to manager or ownership today and go, did you see that? Okay, I tried your way. Now I'm going to try mine. And yes, this doesn't mean that all of a sudden this era of Penguins hockey is over. Undoubtedly, if you're listening to this, you probably saw what I tweeted last night. Kyle Dubas' decision is easy now. Sell. If your name is not Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, or Erik Karlsson, you should be on the table this morning. Period. End of story. Because everybody around them does not have heart. They don't. All the love in the world to Jake Gensel and Brian Rust and everything they've done and everything that has happened with them. But you know what? Why? They don't deserve them. They don't. This team is great. This organization is great. This specific team, this year's team, is not. Sidney Crosby deserved better. He deserves better for this year for what he's doing. But this team does not deserve better. They don't deserve help. They don't deserve to go to the Stanley Cup playoffs. They deserve to miss again. And Kyle Dubas deserves the chance this summer with a lot more impactful money coming off the books to remake this team. So if I'm him this morning, I have sent out an email to 31 NHL general managers and said, anyone not named Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, or Erik Karlsson is up for sale. Name your price. Call me. Let's talk.
Well, I don't know how I can follow up that right there, my friends, but I will say last night was probably the first time I really warmed up to the idea of trading Jake Gensel at the trade deadline. For those who've been listening to the show for especially the last week or two, or even 3 weeks, I have been very much on the train of keeping Jake Gensel, especially if they're in the race, because they've been playing mostly a lot better. Well, that was up until this road trip where they gave up in the third period against Vegas, and then they played like absolute crap against the Arizona Coyotes, even though they tied the game up twice in that game, and it looked like it was going to be 2-2 heading into the intermission before the Penguins just vomited all over themselves. But they showed you who they are on this road trip. They showed you that they're a team that doesn't deserve to be buyers at the trade deadline, that doesn't deserve to have a kick at the can for this season. They showed that they're a team that deserves to do what Washington did last year and do a little retool, sell off a bit at the deadline, and then come back a bit stronger for the next year. That's what they showed, especially last night, but overall for this road trip. And you know what's even more damning to me? Sidney Crosby is putting together an MVP caliber season at age 36. He has put the team on his back, and this is what they're doing to repay him. It's insulting. You saw his reaction after the own goal last night. It was like, I'm not mad, but I'm disappointed. I would love to know what he was just thinking in his head, or what he was going to say to the media if he feel like he could have just cussed up a storm, because you could see how disappointed he was when that happened. Just disappointed overall with the game, because he has been so good for the Penguins this year. And this is what the rest of the team is giving him. It's insulting. That's what it is.
It tells me a lot about the role players on this team.
And you know what? Also, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead.
Here. This was the response game after blowing that lead to Vegas. That shows me who you are as well. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And to build what I was about to say there, it tells me everything I need to know about the role players on this team. And I know a lot of people are going to get angry at me for not yelling about Malkin, Letang, Karlsson, because they haven't been great this year, all things considered. Letang has. Karlsson's been solid, just away from the power play. Malkin's been hot and cold. But at this point, anyone who's not part of the core, which at this point is Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Karlsson, they told me everything they need to know. I needed to know about them last night. Because like you said, Sidney Crosby is having a marvelous season at age 36. He is one of the top 5 players in the National Hockey League this season. I will not be taking questions. Do not ask me them about Sidney Crosby this year. He is firmly in that camp. He's doing all of this while still being the Sidney Crosby he's always been. He is the first guy in and the last guy out. He stays late for practice. He's in the gym. He's in the film room. He does everything that Sidney Crosby has always done. And he is Sidney Crosby at age 36, who has done everything there is to do in the National Hockey League. So what's your excuse, everybody else? What is your excuse? You get beat up by Vegas, who is missing everyone 2 nights prior, and then you go to this college arena where Arizona is playing against a young team, against a couple of guys who used to be on the Penguins, and that's your response. It's gutless. I hate doing the talk radio hot takery of this, but like, it's gutless. That's what it is. That is a gut check game, and they showed up with no guts.
And to go off of that a little bit, just before we head to break here, I hate also doing the sports talk radio things, but I'm going to do it just for this right now. Fire someone or trade someone at this point. You can't keep running the same thing back at this point and hoping that it works. It hasn't. Kyle Dubas can't keep sitting on his hands and just praying that this is going to turn itself around. No. Make some sort of move. Fire an assistant coach. Or, maybe even fire Mike Sullivan, though I don't think he's going to do that. But honestly, if he did, part of me wouldn't be surprised with the way they played on this road trip. But you can't keep sitting on your hands and thinking that this is all going to be okay. You got to do something, considering the power that you have in this organization, the contract that you got over the summer, the money that you make. You got to do something to this team, whether it's some sort of firing or some sort of trade. Just a shakeup, because Jim Rutherford used to do that quite often when he was Penguins general manager. And sometimes it worked. Sometimes it obviously didn't. But something's got to change, man, or something's just got to give, because this is not good enough right now. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss that hilarious own goal, what our reactions were to when we first saw it, and how the Penguins, can they even come back from this? Well, we're going to get into that as well. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about Game Time. It's the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. It has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. You can also find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. All you have to do is take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, and right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. In terms of apply, all you have to do, download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big time ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, the game is the Super Bowl in Las Vegas in just a few weeks. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, we got to get into the own goal here, because when I first saw when I was watching on TV, my jaw obviously dropped. I had never seen that live, and I've been watching this sport for 20 years now. I laughed for a couple of minutes, realized that I had about 15 to 20 pages left of my book. And for those wondering, I was finishing the Darth Maul Shadowhunter book because I am a massive Star Wars geek. And I went and finished my book because, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put myself in a good mood here. The book was really good, and the ending ended up being really good, at least a lot better than the ending of the game last night. But it was a comedy of errors which led to that goal. Chris Letang going back in his own zone. Okay, that's whatever. But my man, why are you doing that stupid drop pass that Pat and I have absolutely killed them for time after time on this show? It makes no sense, especially when you're right by your own goal, when there's no goalie in the nets. What are you doing there? And then Evgeny Malkin my man, that puck is going wide of the net. Why are you even putting your stick on that puck? It was, as I said, a comedy of errors. Everyone is laughing at them, and for good reason. I laughed at them when I first saw it. I can't believe that even happened, to be honest. And it just honestly summed up their season in one play there, I think.
I'm going to give, well, to what you were saying, I was done with my beer league hockey game, sitting at the rink bar with the kid I played hockey with for nearly 20 years. And I literally just put my head in my hands and put it down and stared at my beer when it happened because it was unbelievable. And as for the play itself, let's break this down. Brian Rust, 200 IQ play, knows that there's a delay of game, takes the puck all the way back to their own zone to kill clock, to get more time at 4-on-4 and more time on the power play, or less time at 4-on-4 and more time on the power play. And the Penguins start doing the right thing. They start lugging the puck, keeping it away from the Coyotes, because exactly what I said, less 4-on-4 time, more power play time for when they get possession. 99% of the blame to me lays with Chris Letang. I'll give 1% to Evgeny Malkin for mishandling it and putting a stick out, but what else? That's a snap reaction because he's not expecting to see the puck. He's not. He's really not. Chris Letang has to know you are in an area of the defensive zone with your goalie pulled. Either give the Coyotes the puck or just let it go. You don't need to drop it back. You don't. There is no world where that's the right play. Zero. So 99% of the blame to me lays with Chris Letang for making an absolutely boneheaded play. And yeah, we can get on Evgeny Malkin because I know this town loves dumping on him in every given moment because we still haven't given up on the whole Russian stereotype thing. But all he did was react to something he wasn't expecting. So you can get on him for it, fine, I guess, but that's all Chris Letang to me.
And the funny thing is, when he was skating to the right side of the defensive zone, all you had to do was just keep going a little bit. So what if the defender touches the puck? You're going to get a power play. Even if you go to the boards and just pin it along there, you can just let the guy touch it. And okay, you're going on to the power play. As you said, great play by Brian Rust. But why are you passing the puck back when you know you're so close to the net? It just makes no sense. Obviously, maybe it's a little different if your goalie's in the net there because he's not going to let an own goal in like that. But
well, yeah, if Jari was still there, that's a fine play. If Jari's still there, that's a fine play because you're keeping possession, you're burning clock.
Right.
But he's not there. You have to be aware that your net is empty, and if the puck goes in, it counts.
Yep. And again, that just summed up this season in general, to be honest. And going off that, how do the Penguins come back from this game and this road trip in general? I know they got 2 games up before the All-Star break. We'll do a small preview for that to end the show with Florida and Montreal before we really dive into those 2 teams later on this week. But with the lead that you blew in Vegas and then the game that you played in Arizona where you kind of looked disinterested for basically that entire game, you got outskated, you got outworked, you called it gutless. It looked like they had no energy, no spirit, no loyalty, it felt like, in that game. How does this team come back from that with a few days off now between games? Because this team doesn't play again until Friday when the Florida Panthers come to town, who are one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. How do you think this team comes back from that? Because honestly, if you're asking me, I'm not sure how they do. Like, how are you going to put together a 60-minute effort against that Panthers team after what you just did on that road trip? And you also detailed this in our Monday episode. The Penguins were very nice in letting the team go out to Vegas early to have some fun, and then they show up like that in the third period, and then you put that type of effort out there against Arizona, Pat. That's insulting to members of the organization who let them go out there that early, at least, to, have some fun, get away from Pittsburgh, and you come back with no points and that type of effort. That's just ridiculous too.
Well, the way you come back from this now is, guess what, boys? The playoffs have started. It may be January 23rd, but the playoffs have started. You're now in the playoffs.
Patrick Wall just said to the Islanders, and he just got hired by them a couple days ago. He said we're playing playoff hockey the rest of the way, and they're not even in a spot right now.
You don't worry about what happens next week, what happens the next day. It is literally a hardcore focus on every single game, one at a time, because Anything else is a distraction at this point, because now you're still, I've been so fuming about this game. I'll be honest with our listeners. I haven't done much reading this morning, so I didn't look at the standings. I'm assuming there's still 5 out, maybe more at this point. But at this point, you're in the playoffs. You have to play one game at a time. You have to hyper focus on one game and just win the game in front of you. Other than that, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and explicitly call for Mike Sullivan to be fired, because I still think he's a great coach, but I think the seat's hot now.
I don't think they will fire him this week.
No.
But I agree with what you're saying. That seat is getting
and here's
really
why.
warm.
And here's why. It's not because of the loss. You lose games in an 82-game season. You do. You just do. And there are nights in an 82-game season where you are lifeless. You do. You are. It happens. It's part of the sport. It always will be. It always has been. What bothered me last night and this morning, the one thing I did read was all the post-game stuff and all the recaps. And I appreciate a coach that believes in his players. I appreciate a coach that stands with his players. I really do. I constantly say over and over that professional sports is a career now. These guys aren't leaving the game and going to work their shift at the mill afterwards. To get to the professional leagues, you are the 1% of the 1%, and you are great at what you do. You don't need a guy to come in and kick your ass 24/7. But eventually you need a humbling. And eventually you need to be put on notice. And eventually you need a coach to threaten you and rattle your cage a little bit. Mike Sullivan has yet to do that this year. I appreciate him standing with these guys. I know they won Stanley Cups together. I know they've done a lot of winning together other than just Stanley Cups. But after last night, that's when you come out and say nobody's safe. Nobody did well tonight. Tonight was unacceptable. This was an awful effort. This was putrid. This is bad. You can't come out and say, I think we have a great team in there and I believe in these guys. They know you believe in them. It's been long enough. They know you like them. They know it. But eventually you got to rattle a cage and say, well, maybe this isn't a playoff team. Maybe we aren't good enough anymore. Maybe we've lost a step. Challenge them a little bit. And if he doesn't want to do that, maybe it's time for him to go.
And the funny thing is, I honestly want him to kind of pull like a John Tortorella, just because he coached under him for quite a while. And I kind of want him to just go at the media. I'm not obviously bury the media, but when he talks to media, just kind of bury the team a little bit. And I know that's unorthodox for him, because he's usually he's kind of safe when he talks about the team, I feel like. But that's not the time to be right now. You can't be safe when you're talking about this team with what they just showed you on this road trip. And honestly, what they've showed you overall this season. They've been inconsistent for a lot of this season. It's okay to kind of maybe bury them at times, like your mentor, John Tortorella, has done with his teams throughout his coaching career in the NHL. And I don't want him to always behave like Torts. Torts is one of a kind. And I know he's obviously having a great year with the Flyers, but just kind of go at them a little bit when they're playing like this. That's all, I think. But that will do it. But go ahead. I'm
real quick. He doesn't need to bury them. He doesn't need to come out and scream and yell and throw a bench on the ice and break sticks and make a big scene.
It'd be kind of funny if he did.
After a game like last night, you just come out and say, I don't know if this you challenge them. I don't know if this team's got it anymore.
That's fair.
Maybe we're not as good as we think. Maybe we need to be a little more honest with our game. Call them out. That's it. You don't need to be a dictator.
No, I totally hear you on that. I mean, I would be fine with that too. It would just be, I guess, kind of, I know it would be unorthodox. It would also be kind of funny if he did just really bury them when he's talking to reporters, but he's just honestly never been that type of coach. But he needs to, I guess, be more than safe with how he talks about this team right now, is what I'm definitely trying to say. But I think that will do it for this second segment of today's show. Coming up to end the show, Pat and I are going to look at what's next for this team, as they have 2 more games before the All-Star break. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about Sleeper, which is the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is their #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because of Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. You can do this by yourself. You can even do this with your friends or your family, and you don't even have to do just hockey. You can do NFL, NBA, MLB, and college football with Sleeper, and the entries can be made in less than a minute. All you have to do is pick weather studs like Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, Nathan and McKinnon, and Nikita Kucherov will record goals, assists. You can throw plus minus in there. You can throw some goalies in there for players, and you can do saves for their stats. And to win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Penguins fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, as I've said probably 10,000 times on this episode already, 2 more games for the All-Star break. We're going to preview them in detail a little later on this week, probably for the Friday episode of the show. But they got the Florida Panthers coming to town, and then they have the Montreal Canadiens coming to town. A back-to-back this upcoming weekend before the break, and that's going to be over a week long to really recharge themselves for a lot of February, and then obviously March, which is the gauntlet, and then April as well. The Florida Panthers, they're one of the best teams in the league this year, 28-14-4 right now. They have 60 points, good for second place in the Atlantic. They've won 6 of their last 10 games. This is very much one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. You go to Montreal, they're 19-20-7. They've lost 6 of their last 10 games, including 2 in a row. You would figure that will be a win for the Penguins, but honestly, with how they're playing right now, you don't know who is going to be a win for this team. But if they want to somehow show Dubas that they are worthy of being a team that could be, I guess, added to at the trade deadline, even though they definitely don't deserve it right now, they're going to have to go out there and play 120 minutes of the best hockey that they have played yet this season. And that means playing outstanding against the Panthers, who they've already lost to, and against Canadian team that they have struggled against a little bit these last couple of years, especially last year where they didn't even beat the Canadians. I know they beat them earlier this year, but that was still a struggle considering they were down by multiple goals a couple times in that game. But they need their 2 best performances yet if they have any shot of showing Dubas that they deserve help, I guess.
For sure. And if I can expand my everyone not named Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson should be on the table for Dubas, everything should be on the table for Mike Sullivan this week. And that means your top 6, your bottom 6, your defensive pairings, your goaltending rotation, because at this point, after this trip, and I know it's only 2 games, I know in the grand scheme, they've been pretty okay, but the magnitude of these 2 losses cannot be understated, because in a vacuum, yes, like they're bad, they're losses, big picture, no, it's not that big a deal, but you're now 5 points out to a playoff spot with the All-Star break creeping up here, and you've got a really, really good team coming to town and then a really, really bad team. And at this point, what you have seen over and over is that this team can't find consistency. And you haven't done a whole lot to change the lineups, to change the special teams. You can probably keep the PK together. They've been solid. You don't have to tweak the goalie rotation too much, but defensive pairings can change. The lines should change. The power play obviously should change. But at this point, if you're what's next is you need to find a spark of some sort to give this team a kick in the ass and get this team back on track.
And to go off that, what is that spark? I mean, are you going to call up Sam Poulin from Wilkes-Barre? Are you going to give Jesse Puljujarvi a shot in the NHL and give him a contract? That's all fine and dandy, but are those truly big sparks for this team? I mean, I would maybe argue no, just because, I mean, they're down in Wilkes-Barre right now. And, Poulin, I know he's playing really well for Wilkes-Barre right now, but I just don't think that's going to be the big spark that this team needs for the rest of the season. I think same with Puljujarvi. I know he's had a couple decent games lately, but I don't think that's going to be this major spark that a lot of people, both of us included, are looking for. I mean, one easy move potentially is moving Ryan Graves back down. He was terrible last night. And it's funny,
Awful.
Pat, we praised him a little bit for the last couple of weeks, and he was playing a bit better. And then he goes over and barfs all over himself, in that game against Arizona, and was out to lunch on a couple of their goals. not good enough overall from him. I would probably move him down a little bit again, but then you also have P.O. Joseph that would move back up with Erik Karlsson. We've seen how that has been this season, though. I will say P.O. Joseph had a pretty decent game against Arizona, one of the 3 players that actually did. And to expand on your list where you would only have Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Karlsson as the untouchables, I would still argue that Marcus Pettersson could be in there. And yes, you could definitely, I think, get a decent haul for him. And while I understand that he did have a couple of brutal games, probably 2 of his worst games as a member of the Penguins since he joined the team, I think I would still consider him a core player, and I would be keeping him for quite a while because they don't have another player like him on their back end. There's just no one close that can put out the defensive impacts that he can on an every night basis. So I would kind of include him in there, in my opinion. But there are definitely no easy answers to this right now, to say the least.
No, there aren't. And you look at guys like Pettersson, like Jake, even Russ to an extent, and that might be the difficult decision to get this team back on track.
Russ does have a no move clause, so he would have to approve it, but also at the same time, does he want to stick around on this team for the next several years with the way this is going? I mean, I don't know. I'm obviously not inside his head, but I will say he has the final say for where he wants to go.
And again, I've said this to multiple people over the last few hours. Yeah, he's got a no move clause. Those never get moved, right? Never. They never.
Right.
Guys with no move clauses never get traded. It never happens. So, like, I understand it's a hurdle, but it's not an impossible one. And it, I don't know. Like, I think honestly, what's next overall is they're going to play hockey the rest of the way out. But at this point, if you're Kyle Dubas, you call Fenway Sports Group and say, this season's cooked. We're done. I am going to move some assets, and we're going to do what Washington did last year. We are going to sell off some names you might not like us selling off as a fan base, but when this team's back in the competition for the Metropolitan Division next year, you'll have fond memories of them. You'll hang the jersey in the closet and go get the new guy's jersey.
And it is kind of working a bit this year for Washington. I mean, they're more in the race right now, I would say, than the Penguins are, to be honest. But I think that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast, unless you have anything else to say about this ridiculous, embarrassing loss against the Arizona Coyotes. But
no, I'm good.
Yeah,
I think I got it all out.
I think so too. I think we've ranted long enough about this team in the 32, 33 minutes that we have done for today's episode. But the good news is we'll be back on Wednesday to do Warrior Helmet Wednesday. But we'll have to see if anyone actually deserves the Warrior helmet after what happened over the last week. We'll figure that out, and we'll figure out other things to talk about as well. Then we'll have episodes for you all for Thursday and Friday of this week. But again, thank you all so much for listening to / watching this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. We'll be back for you all on Wednesday.